when kush nanamat to mukstem tunawel high tap custom nasya tom. Just want to say thank you for having me here today. My name is Larry Grant. I'm
Watch
from the
goodness,
First Nation, and I want to raise my hands and welcome to all of you here and be a participant within today's discussions. And I hope we're all in good health and taking good care of each other. And I hope we have a very good discussion today. Hi, Chap Gasiam, Nasiaya, Kalet Gunsit Tala, Taswalap, Inam, Tanawel. Hi, Chap Gasiam. Thank you. Achka.
Thank you so much, Elder Larry Grant, for opening up this meeting in a good way. Again, welcome to the All Chiefs meeting. My name is Selena Dorme. I'm the engagement coordinator for the First Nations Public Service Secretariat, but I'm also from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation here in North Vancouver, which is where I am dialing in from. So I would also like to recognize the neighboring nations also on this unceded territory of the Musqueam and the Squamish peoples. I would now like to call on Kakpi Judy Wilson from the Union of BC Indian Chiefs to get this webinar started.
Thank you. Just sorry about that, just calling in from the road. I'd like to thank Elder Grant for the prayer and the opening for us to be able to come together, to be able to talk about some of the critical things from the throne speech, but also from what's happening in the various communities across our nations. First of all, I'd just like to say, the throne speech, had a lot of wonderful words again, a lot of, identification to, working with our nations. As was said last time, there's no important relationship as the relationship with our Indigenous peoples, but it was the issue from the last time, which we're seeing still, is the follow through in those commitments. And the other thing is the COVID supports for our nations were inadequate the first round. I think many communities stretched out the funding as much as they could, but the proper equipment and the proper equipment and supplies that we needed for COVID is still needs to be worked on, and also those adequate resources. I don't know how much the resources that are allocated this time around are going to be. It's a second wave. Many communities are already experiencing that in their communities already, and it's just the start of that second wave. The reconciliation we hear is the most important across the ministries, across the ministers, and we really need to see that implemented. It's I also wondered, because the ministers, Minister Miller and Minister Bennett, they split the departments, but we haven't seen any organization chart unless it's out there, and we haven't seen it. That would be very helpful in understanding the split in the ministries, because there's still a question from time to time which issue belongs to which ministry, and we're always having to go and get that clarified between Minister Miller and Minister Bennett. So I think that would be very helpful in transparency and accountability on which departments which, and how they're going to be laying out their mandates and their priorities. And I also recall S3 discussion with Minister Miller. We had some tough questions for him with the women's group, I think about a week ago, asking for a more stronger mandate in sex discrimination against women in the Indian Act. So I don't know if that information has been forthcoming yet, but it really needs to. And also the national inquiry, the implementation of that, it's more government-led than Indigenous women-led. We really need to get on to the right track with that for the implementation. And also I see the investments of, housing, revenue sharing, language revitalization. Those are all important, especially the C92 implementation for children's and families. We still are working on that, and there still needs more clarity around the when you provide notice and the how the funding is working for those nations that are wanting to draw on their jurisdiction and stand up their jurisdiction for their nations. That seems to be quite slow going. And also the declaration on the rights of Indigenous people, the infamous bill C262 from last year. I know we're all looking at what that's going to look like, but it has to be the full implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and not under the constitutional or the federal government laws and framework. It really needs to be a full implementation of those international laws. So that there's issues, in regards to what that would look like, and what that would look like in legislation. And also I think it's just really important, again, with COVID, our nations are looking for that support and ways to address issues as they come about in our communities and our nations. There's some nations that are developing their nation COVID plans. That's really great. And then the community plans, and then the family plans. And as any issues come up, the sort of tripartite approach in resolving those issues for these families. I'm not sure if I missed anything. Those are the thoughts that, as I was thinking while I was driving today, knowing that, we'd be speaking to the All Chiefs today. And certainly BC has did a lot of work in and around children and family, and around the very specific issues we have from BC going, nationally. And we had our plans in place, and we expect that the ministers, Minister Miller and Bennett, and the Trudeau government will respect those wishes. What we set out as very strong standards, very strong principles, and very strong goals that we have for our chiefs here in BC. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy Wilson. I'd like to call on Robert Phillips, Executive Task Group member from the First Nations Summit Society, to speak next.
Wait, Chukwinuk, Squatwin, Robert Phillips, as mentioned, with the First Nations Summit. I'll be very quick. I'd like to acknowledge all the chief and council and leadership and hereditary chiefs that are on board for this Zoom meeting. Calling from Chilliwack, Stalo Territory, and I'd like to thank Elder Grant for the welcoming and prayer. And thank you, Minister, for having this very important meeting and follow up right away. So I know that you want to have a say, and then the chief responds. So I also like to thank the First Nations Public Service Secretariat for putting this together. I know COVID-19 with the second wave and potentially third wave coming up, it's going to be very important that we have the capacity and funding that's very necessary for our communities, for our tribal councils, for our bands, for our nations. So we emphasize that a lot, and without that resources, it's going to be very detrimental for our elders, for our community members. And we want to know that our community members will be protected against the potential second and third wave. I do think very important that we have and put not only words to the throne speech, but action as well. So I know reconciliation is just a word, but we're looking for, this has been in a number of years now, so we're looking for follow up on the many things that the Prime Minister has been promising and looking to do. Very quickly, looking forward to the engagement with Canada on the United Nations Declaration. As you know, we have the DRIPA, or the Declaration Act, here in Canada, so this legislation will be very important. And the leadership here in British Columbia, we've been very involved, so we would expect not only information, but for all of us to be involved in the co-development and working on any legislation, because we have the experience in doing so here in British Columbia. We also would expect consultation with our chiefs, and because of the number of things that we're doing here in British Columbia, I think that's, again, very necessary. And working together. So whether it's BC, Canada, whether it's the Health Council, Health Authority, all of these organizations, all our First Nations organizations, I think will be very important in this, but as well as our leadership. I can't emphasize that enough. So to consult and accommodate, and with the free, prior, and informed consent of our community members, our nations and leadership. But with that, I want to just pass it on back to you, and thank you for having this meeting.
Thank you so much, Robert Phillips. Next, I'd like to call on Chief Harvey Macleod, representing the BC Assembly of First Nations.
My name is Harvey Macleod, and I'm the Chief for Upper Nicola Band. Also a Board of Director for the BC Assembly of First Nations, and I'm calling you from beautiful Syilx territory, Okanagan Nation. Thank you, Elder. It's always good to see you, to hear you, and have your kind, thoughtful words, open sessions for us. Thank you, Chair Selena, for taking care of us and guiding us here today. And it's always good to hear and see you, Honourable Minister. Good afternoon, Chiefs and leadership. BCFN right now is going through a process of selecting governance, selecting our leader and co-leaders, regional chief directors and youth representatives. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here today. So on behalf of Regional Chief Terry Teegee, it's good to be here, and it's good that we're participating and having an opportunity to say a few words on behalf of our assembly. This past year, in particular, it has been a difficult year for First Nations. Lives and communities in British Columbia have been deeply impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. We look and sometimes reminisce of what life was like at the beginning of March and where we're at today. And we've seen a lot of change. We've had to change how we do business. We've had to come closer as family, as community, to support one another. And on behalf of my community and many communities throughout this region, we just thank everyone for the support that we got, that we received during these difficult times. The BCFN has seen slow progress made in previous year's commitments, and we do expect to see full and concrete delivery of promises that have been made in the recent speech from the throne. We always go back and remember, what we say to one another and how we're going to conduct ourselves and how we're going to make lives better for the people, for our people across this great land. And we always hinge our wellness on high hopes that things will change. We've seen some change, but we still need more, and we're going to need to work with you a lot closer in this next year to fulfill some of the promises and some of the discussions that we had in previous years. And we must address the many critical issues that we are experiencing here as First Nations in this great province of British Columbia. Reminiscing about and thinking about the speech from the throne that just happened recently, there was mention of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We've been down this road before. We really need to find a way to implement that. I know as an individual and as a leader that we have a lot of hope that that piece of legislation is going to change the relationship that we have within our community, within with our neighbors and with governments. It's so critical. And this road and this path that we're leading now and walking down to on implementing the UNDRIP is so important. The development and implementation of the National Action Plan on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and the Two-Spirited. As we heal, as we become more aware, and as we support one another, what we see happening in our communities and with our people, we really need to have a careful look at that and ensure that what we're doing and the plans that we make and the promises that we make to one another is kept up, especially on this file. Infrastructure and affordable housing, always an issue. as we heal and get better and people come home, we need a place for them to stay. And we need to be working with all levels of government to ensure that we are in a path where our people can have a place to stay, they'll have a place to call home. Climate change. As we become again more aware of our environment, when we look at the world nowadays, we know that we have to spend some time implementing, not only talking, but implementing strategies on how we're going to take care of Mother Earth. She needs us. And we're seeing it year after year. She's crying for help, floods, fires. And we need to be on top of it. We're doing the best we can, but I think that if we join forces, we'll find more ways on how we can do that. Expedite work to co-develop new legislation to ensure access to high quality, cultural relevant healthcare and mental health and wellness. Our whole world revolves around our health and the supports that we can give one another to help our people heal. We are in a generation of healing, and this agenda and this plan is so important for us to find a way on how we can take care of ourselves so that we have an opportunity to give out and share with the world who we are. Racism. It's something that we never talked about before, but God, in the last 6 months, we've seen so much. I'm feeling it personally. In the small city of Merritt, I feel it. I go into Kamloops, I feel it. And I can only imagine what our people are facing when they do move around the country, and especially during a pandemic. So let's give it some light. Let's give it some day, and let's put some light on it. Let's shine our light on it so that we are and know that systemic racism is alive and well in this country. Action on reforms in the justice system. Again, we're doing some work, but we can do more. We know that along with helping the wellness and health of our people, there are some that we don't want to forget, and them are the people that are involved or entangled in the justice system. And I know that we need more dialogue to fix that, to clear that path, and to bring our people home. Time is of the essence. We've did a lot of talking. We've shared a lot. We've come to the table with our hearts in our sleeves, and now we got no time to be talking. And I know that the regional chief and the chiefs that we all work with, we'll find a way on how we can do that. So with that, way limited, thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Harvey Macleod. I'd like now, next, I will call on Chief Charlene Bello from the First Nations Health Council.
Thank you. And in the interests of time, I don't want to stand between Minister Miller and our chief, so my comments will be very brief. Again, just thank you to Elder Larry Grant for the opening prayer today. And thank you, Minister Miller, for making time for us. I want to acknowledge the chiefs that are on the line and their leaders for the good work over the last 6 months, keeping our communities safe. COVID-19 and the opioid crisis bring very big challenges for our community. I understand from this morning that we've had 9 deaths within our communities and 528 cases. This may seem small compared to the rest of the country, but it's big for our communities where, especially the remote communities that face challenges. The biggest challenge we faced, I think, with COVID-19 is the privacy of individuals and balancing those interests with the need for our leaders to keep our community members safe. So we've worked closely with Dr. Bonnie Henry and the First Nations Health Authority to make sure that there is a proper notification pathway to mitigate further spread, but also to have culturally appropriate contact tracing done in our communities. Our people know our people, they know where to find them, and we can work quicker when we work in conjunction with the health authorities. All of the COVID and the opioid crisis happening, the racism, You know, when our people need the health system the most, it's failing our people, and that is tragic. The system needs to change to be able to respond to our people. Going forward, I look forward to the discussions that we can have and will have around federal legislation specific to health that can improve how we provide health supports to our communities, as well as the mental health strategy that we need to continue to work on together. I also look forward to the commitments made in the throne speech, specifically on the social determinants of health and the 10-year strategy that the Health Council is currently embarking on over the next 18, 24 months here, so that we can actually look at health transformation and make services and programs more applicable to our people within our nations. Again, it's an opportunity to improve the health services for our people, but we need the strong support of your leadership to make that happen. Again, thank you to the chiefs and thank you to the leaders for the work that you've done so far to keep our communities safe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Bello. Next, I'd like to call on Dr. Shannon Mcdonald from the First Nations Health Authority.
Thank you. And like others, I want to thank Elder Grant for his words and that gift to us of bringing our spirit into the room. And thank you all for allowing me to speak on behalf of my team members at the First Nations Health Authority, recognizing our interim CEO, Richard Jock, who has deferred his spot on the agenda to me, and the other executive leads who are working very hard on these issues as we go forward and are available to support and respond to questions as you need. As Charlene has mentioned, the numbers change daily. So actually we're up to 241 today. Cumulative cases in the province, 168 or about a third are resident on reserve. We have 139 active cases. And as mentioned, tragically, we've lost 9 individuals to COVID. But the thing that is most concerning right now is what we call the percentage positivity. And that is when individuals go for testing, how many of them, what percentage of them test positive? And right now, in the last couple of weeks, First Nations in BC are testing positive at about 4.5% of tests. The average positivity in BC is 1.87. So that tells us one of two things, is that one is we're getting to the right people who need to get tested and they're testing positive. So something's going right. The other thing that concerns me is the level of transmission that's occurring in communities. Many of our clusters that have been occurring have been as directly related to gatherings, to times when families or groups of people get together to do the things that they would normally do to support each other, especially when there are major events or ceremonies. We know that about 74% of our individual cases are connected to those clusters. And only 10% actually have what's known as an unknown exposure. So they have a positive test, but we can't trace where that may have come from. And tragically, in the context of all of this, we're talking about 9 deaths with COVID. Since January of this year, we have recorded 162 deaths related to the opioid crisis in BC. In the first 6 months, our rates were 93% higher than they had been the previous year. So we know not only is COVID here, but some of the unintended consequences of COVID and the poison drug supply are leading people to a very difficult and challenging time. And I won't go into any more conversation. I respect your desire to have a conversation with the minister. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shannon Mcdonald. I would like to now call on the Honourable Marc Miller, Minister of Indigenous Services.
Thank you. Isquel, good day, hello, bonjour. Thank you for allowing me to join today. And I will keep my observations and my remarks relatively short. First off, I want to thank Elder Larry Grant for opening us up in a good way, and for the First Nations Leadership Council and First Nations Health Council for your strong leadership and opening remarks throughout, and your leadership throughout this pandemic that is far from being over. And while this has been exceedingly hard on all Canadians, what it has shown us, and I think there was mention made of the speech from the throne, is that it has made the gaps that have existed for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis all too clear. And I'm fully aware that, and this is what COVID has done, it's magnified the socioeconomic challenges facing British Columbia Indigenous communities and businesses. And it's why the government has provided a little over 155 million directly to First Nations in BC since the start, with of note 30 million just last week. The department has also worked in partnership with FNHA, and I really want to thank them for the excellent work and really the model that they're showing the rest of the country. $36 million to support BC First Nations in their work. That work has been key to keeping people safe. And the numbers, you know, one death is one too many. But the work, there is a good story to be told in how, despite the odds and despite the gaps that have existed, First Nations, Indigenous communities, Métis, Inuit, have responded exceedingly well with the odds stacked against them. And it's something that is really due to leadership, political health leadership in the community. And FNHA has played no small part in that, and including the people on the line. This is something that, while we take great pride in seeing the work that's been done, really, hopefully the trust that's been built, we can't take it for granted, because the second wave, while we move to from risk elimination, which was really the approach during the first wave, to risk management in the second wave, it will undoubtedly hit Indigenous communities harder than the first wave hit them. I'm seeing the numbers growing. I'm seeing the number of active cases across Canada growing, and it's time. And I'm sure you're doing it because we see that increased vigilance. It really is important to reiterate the basic messages that we pushed through at the very beginning, but also improving the partnership that we have had throughout this, because we are in this for the long run, and we're going to need everyone's expertise to bear to make sure people continue to stay safe. In last month's speech from the throne, obviously conscious of the fact that it was only a year after a very ambitious, in regards to Indigenous communities, speech from the throne in 2019, the Prime Minister, the Governor General reiterated those priorities, but also highlighted the ones that really needed accentuating as we are going forward. In the light of COVID, obviously keeping people safe, continuing to move forward on addressing some of the socioeconomic gaps. That's why some of the health-related points, were front and center, as well as UNDRIP. Obviously, British Columbia being a leader there, we know and we have recommitted to introduce legislation before the end of the year, and my full understanding and expectation from the Minister of Justice is we will continue to do so. I'm conscious that what was in the throne speech were words. Words do matter. I really truly believe that they do, but actions matter more. And I think, if anything, that we have proven even ever so modestly is that we will continue to engage and continue to work with you to ensure that the partnerships and the great work that's been done through COVID and building back better is the word that's being used. But when it comes to Indigenous communities addressing the gaps that existed going into COVID, and even moving quicker on some of the undertakings that we had highlighted in 2019, particularly as it deals with housing, knowing that overcrowding is a vector of spread for respiratory illnesses. We know that from experience. It wasn't just COVID that showed us that. It's something that we need to, I believe, move much quicker on, and lockstep, obviously, in the implementation of the passage of UNDRIP, and implementation of those very ambitious but very important declarations that exist within within the legislation. Clearly, and like you, I'm deeply saddened to hear of the tragic passing of a First Nations youth in BC recently in care, and do want to extend my deepest sympathies on behalf of my family and myself, and behalf of Indigenous Services Canada to the youth's family, obviously whose privacy that we are respecting. The focus on children was one that I began my mandate on and will continue on in implementing C92. The fiscal update that was brought forward by Minister Morneau a few months ago highlighted the over $500 million for implementation of C92 over the next few years. That is not an insignificant sum, but it goes part and parcel with our continued work on implementing and standing up jurisdiction with a number of communities, of which there are already a number that have begun those conversations, but always prepared to ramp that up. Clearly, COVID has been a challenge, as we respect the community's priorities to keep people safe and alive first and foremost, but it doesn't mean we can't do things at the same time, whether it's infrastructure or standing up jurisdiction. And it's something that, as we move into this new normal, as I've mentioned to Cookie Wilson, with respect to S3, it is something that we have to learn to do in this new normal in a better fashion with the resources to bear. And I am optimistic on that end as well. I want to highlight some of the work that has been done with respect to some of your advocacy insofar as it touches urban Indigenous or off reserve. These are all sort of false dichotomies, but the advocacy that people on this line and more have done on behalf of really having the government step up and fund organizations that have done remarkable work off reserve, it is really something we need to celebrate. Given that it's COVID, the amounts that we have invested seem small, but had we done so a couple of years ago and stated that we were going to put $90 million into urban Indigenous or off-reserve community wellness initiatives, that would have been, a truly historic amount. It has made a big difference in the lives of the people that I serve in BC. Perhaps you caught the announcement by MP Patrick Wheeler, who announced that 62 organizations in BC had received a little close to $7 million of funding through the Indigenous Community Support Fund for off-reserve to respond to the pandemic. Dr. Shannon Mcdonald, you had highlighted a very important point as to what that testing is actually indicating, and it is exceedingly important to continue to consider how we are implementing, how we are testing, tracking, testing, and isolating being the keys to stamping out COVID in communities. That testing portion is exceedingly important. There is a science and a bit of art to testing as we work with political leadership, as FNHA has done so well in working with political leadership and medical leadership in the communities. Obviously, when we start to deploy more and more testing, we start to cast a bigger net, and perhaps we aren't actually capturing the people that we want. And so when those percentages drop, it can mean exactly what you said, one of two things. Either there's more of a spread, and to that you have to look at other indicators, or we're just catching too many, we're just testing too many people, both of which can have an impact on the capacity of the system to process these in a timely fashion, to move into the other elements and factors that are part of a seamless strategy in terms of being able to track and isolate. And so I do want to I really appreciate that distinction you made, because I think in the general population that distinction is misunderstood. Again, I know I have to vote in about half an hour, so I do want to stop speaking now. There were a number of points raised, including the hidden epidemic, mental health, the opioid crisis, the harm reduction models that we know yield results that are not judgmental and that keep people alive are so key to keeping people safe during the expression of the hidden epidemic behind COVID. And I'm glad we're speaking about that. We have made significant mental health investments. It might be argued that they are insufficient. They are not insignificant, but I think we've only touched the tip of the iceberg when it comes to substance abuse, but that disproportionately affects, and I've seen this, perhaps the same report that you have seen in BC, that is touching Indigenous communities in a disproportionate fashion, and I do acknowledge that. So I would really welcome your input and any more views on how we deploy dedicated funds to support mental health generally, but the most acute expressions of that being suicide ideation and obviously the opioid crisis. I will leave it off at that. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak, and just glad to be here for the remaining time at hand. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honourable Marc Miller, for your presentation. We're now going to open it up for Q&A. We are scheduled to wrap up this webinar at 3:30, so we only have about 20 minutes left. If you would like to ask your question live, you can use the raise hand function to raise your little blue hand, and you can find that by clicking on the participants list. At the bottom of that list, there is a row of icons, and there should be a blue hand. I would like to indicate that we're giving priority for leadership to answer, so chief and council members to answer your questions first. If we don't have any other people that want to ask, then we can move on to that. But please keep your questions short and concise to ensure that we can answer everyone's questions in the 20 minutes that we have left. So I would like to ask Adam Warner to go ahead and ask your first question. You did submit some questions in the Q&A, but you've also raised your hand. So I'm going to go ahead and allow you to speak now to ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Minister Miller, for your update with respect to COVID. You have also addressed the issue of opiate crisis and some mental health issues. And here in the north, I'm from Prince George, and I'm the CEO for Secretariat Family Services, and I'm proxy for Chief Karina Lewin. She had connectivity issues within her territory, so she asked me to represent her. Long story short, aside from COVID, opiate has also hit our communities quite significantly, particularly in Prince George. And Chief Lewin did write to you with respect to immediate attention to this matter, and that matter not be lost within the confines of this COVID environment, and to ensure we move ahead and address some of the opiate and mental health crises that our people face today. And some of these are compounded crises. Having said that, the First Nations Health Authority did commit $5 million to Secretariat people to build a treatment center. However, that is not sufficient. So Chief Lewin would like your commitment to meet with a delegation from Secretariat to address the opiate crisis and the need for a quality, holistic, culturally appropriate treatment facility in our territory. If you look at all of BC, North Central does not have a treatment center or a healing center specifically dedicated to Indigenous healing. That's my question on behalf of Chief Lewin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Warner, for that question. I'd like to ask Honourable Marc Miller to turn on your video and your audio to respond to that question.
Yeah, I'll look quite quickly. Absolutely, we can meet. I know Griffin, who is my political attaché dedicated to BC, is on the line, and I saw Catherine, and glad to meet with Warner and go through this, or the chief for that matter, and go through the details of that proposal. Obviously, the model that we support seems to fall in line with what Warner is asking, and glad to do so at his convenience.
Thank you so much. The next raised hand is Maureen Luggy. If you could please unmute yourself and indicate where you're calling from.
Good afternoon. Thank you. It's Chief Maureen Luggy from Wet'suwet'en First Nation in Burns Lake. I appreciate this opportunity to make a presentation in brief to the Minister regarding the current opioid crisis that is occurring in Northern British Columbia, and I will keep it brief. I am in full support of the presentation that has come forth by the Carriers to Canny Family Services. Our community is dealing with, and I'm sure many other communities as well, are dealing with very serious impacts of drug and alcohol abuse. And it's, along with the pandemic, it has increased the stress load on families and community and our frontline workers. And so with that understanding and that explanation, I just wanted to lend my support to Carriers to Canny Family Services and Chief Karina Lewin, who is the president, about the very serious need for the treatment, detox, and aftercare facility that is being planned in North Central BC, and appreciate the work that is being done to support our people. And the need is right now, and going forward, I understand that construction will begin in 2022. So with that, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to say this to the forum. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Chief Luggy. The next hand raised is Joshua Charleston.
Hi, good afternoon. Joshua Charleston here. I'm from the Eshko First Nation. I'm living in Tishot and Hoop-Pichessit territory in Port Alberni. My question is around continued support for remote communities when it comes to mental health and substance treatment. We do have some options around Vancouver Island, but our community is so remote that I'm just wondering if there's any support out there for continued support within our community. We are an hour and a half boat ride by speedboat out of Tofino, BC, so we're quite remote. And the nearest treatment center that we do have access to is in Port Alberni, which is about a 3.5 to 4 hour drive away. Quite pricey as well to get on a boat. So I'm just wondering if there's any continued support that we can look at for people that have gone to treatment and have returned back home, just to ensure that they continue to have full support throughout their entire healing journeys.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Minister Marc Miller, would you like to turn on your video and provide any comments on those two?
I usually have had challenges with the mute button, so far so good, but I'm going to jinx myself. I would actually encourage you to work with Catherine to see what the needs are. I know we are deploying mental health funds. I would caution people as to infrastructure builds. The funds are intended for supports, I guess, on a more immediate basis. And I know there are needs across Canada for infrastructure and capital supports. This is something that, as we look forward, I want to put a little more focus on. But clearly, when it comes to current needs and how we have accessibility for e-health solution, knowing that broadband accessibility is a challenge, we can see if there aren't innovative ways that support specific nations' health needs. I won't speculate as to what a particular nation's needs are, without knowing. And so that's why I'm not punting when I say talk to Catherine and Griffin, but I think we need to get a better snapshot of what is needed. Obviously, traveling a tremendous amount of a tremendous distance to get the support that people need is not right. So I'd encourage continued conversations on that end, because we do have funds. It just depends on the nature and specificity of the requests. And just to add, I have asked my officials to be very flexible in how that is approached. It isn't, when I say that, it's not kind of sign on this preconceived piece of paper with what we think you need as help. Throughout COVID, we have seen that where we have best results is where we respect the wishes of the community and the health needs in particular. So I encourage continued engagement.
Thank you so much. The next question was submitted through the Q&A. It's from Don Harris, Chief of Douglas First Nation. Under mental health, what programs can be created for elders that have been isolated in their homes for the last 6 months? There has been a major lifestyle change, and that is affecting their health. Minister, could you turn your video and audio back on? Here we go.
Now I messed up the mute button. I did it to myself. Look, I know that it is really, and you see it across the country, it is really alarming to see the impact that this has had, particularly on the elderly. We know that COVID hits, if you just look at the long-term care facilities where 80% of the deaths have occurred, this is something that is exceedingly alarming. Part of that has been closing people up, and that's not right. We are physical people, and particularly the most elderly that have routines and have found themselves exceedingly isolated, even in normal circumstances. Our elderly are secluded. I think there are models that work and models that don't. I can't, Don, I can't offer specific suggestions as to what those could be. I would encourage you with your community to reach out if there is a need, particularly with helping those that are isolated, to work with us how we can support those needs, particularly those that are closed up. I saw the armed forces doing all sorts of things to keep the elderly in my community a little more entertained, and that interaction is priceless, and keeping them well and safe, and making them feel that they're spending some of these homes, and I know there are precious few in Indigenous communities, but there are places where people are supposed to spend their last years of their lives in dignity, and there were and have been, and the risk still is that the elderly die in complete indignity. And we don't want to see another wave of what we've seen. Mental health is a big portion of that. So again, reach out to Catherine and Griffin, and we're glad to help, as well as the solutions that obviously exist. And perhaps some people from FNHL might want to venture some thoughts, if I can be so bold as to suggest that.
We did receive 2 other questions from via email before the webinar had started. So that question is, will ISC look into providing funding to First Nation bands for their off-reserve members? What needs to be done in order to make this happen? We are responsible for all of our members, and we are, in a sense, discriminating against our members by not providing them the same resources as our on-reserve members.
It's an exceedingly important question, and as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, it's a bit of a delicate question to answer, because well, obviously what we found most effective when we've had jurisdictional tangles is to act, and to the extent it's helpful, and ask questions later. It's not the best way to run a country, but it's a very important way to keep people alive. And I think this is the beauty of not only system that exists in BC insofar as we have FNHA to inform us, but also the work that needs to be done, and the relationships that Indigenous Services Canada has yet to build with a number of these community organizations that serve community members. The flexibility in the amounts that we supported in the Indigenous Community Support Fund wasn't limited to on-reserve members. We gave money with essentially few strings attached to band council and nothing precluded them from helping their members off reserve. Obviously, a number of those members don't necessarily turn to their band and council to get resources. There are various organizations, whether there's a Friendship Center or the web of community organizations that serve Indigenous people. We were able, after really what was in round one of the Indigenous Community Support Fund, an insufficient amount of $15 million that essentially went to a number of the friendship centers, we were able to secure another, on top of the 15 million, another 75 that was distributed in very short order to community organizations, and we were able to fund about 62 in British Columbia. I think Catherine or Griffin can supply a complete list of those organizations so that the person who asked the question could get a sense of where a person in his community could turn to. Again, we're not out of the woods yet, and I'm ready to go back. These are not normal funding mechanisms that Indigenous Services Canada has, so it requires a little more work with our friends at Finance. But we know how welcome those funds were, and really the level of funding is, I feel still insufficient, but something I think to be quite proud of in terms of the people that were served by it. But again, a lot of work does remain.
Richard Jock has raised his hand. Going to go ahead and allow you to speak now. You can unmute yourself, please, and introduce yourself, where you're from, and ask your question.
Thank you. This is Richard Jock, Interim CEO of the First Nations Health Authority, and I just wanted to add to the comments made by Minister Miller earlier in terms of mental health. And what I would say is that it'd be important for communities to work with their respective regional executive director. We have received an allocation of just under $7 million to deal with mental health issues, broadly speaking, across BC. And the opportunity is to design both community specific, but also targeted programs for such interests as elders. I also wanted to mention that we also have broad-based cultural supports available. And at this point, we've pivoted those to be provided virtually so that these services can continue in our current context. So I just wanted to add that to say that those resources will be made available shortly. And we're also looking at regional initiatives such as opioid needs and targeted response like already raised. So I just wanted to add those. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Before you jump off there was a question directly for FNHA. Is there a sample pandemic plan which communities can use as a template? And if so, where can they find that? Who do they contact in order to get that?
Yes, we have a broad base of resources which include templates for those community plans. And if the person sends me their email, I'll have our crises team supports contact them. Also, we have broad-based plans such as business resumption, other guidelines, all on our website, and also routinely push out information on our FNHA app, which is also available for rapid communications. So our website, and we can also push out information if you give me the specific context.
Thank you so much, Richard. We just have a few minutes left, and I'd like to open it up to any of the other chiefs on the line if they have a question that they would like to ask live. You can use the raised hand function to do that. Click on the participants list and click on the little blue hand. We have Don Harris, Chief of Douglas First Nation. Go ahead and unmute.
Okay, I guess this is more going towards the funds that went to tribal councils. I mean, not to friendship centers. Is that there's not a whole lot of friendship centers out there where community members have access to. You know, and you know, I put that question out there. Is that I lost my mother 2 weeks ago, again caused by the effects of COVID. where she's been cooped up at her place for the last 6 months. There is no support in the area she was living. There is no tribal council, no friendship center there. So I don't believe any of my members have had any access to any of the emergency funds that were sent out for off reserve members. So I think that we need to know, where do our members go to seek this help? Who was the money sent to? And again, there's another issue that we still have to address. It is we lost our member to COVID on March 28th. We have not yet seen the family. We've not yet been able to address the family. So it's been quite some time. When none of the family members got to see our member once she went in the hospital, that was it. They never saw her again. So none of this has been addressed, and this is since March 28th. So these are some of the areas that we need to start looking at. And it creates a lot of issues under the mental health side. So we need to find, where do we seek this help? I had a majority of my members that live in the Chilliwack area. Where's the help there? None of our members have been able to access any help from any of the whoever's got the funding. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chief Harris. And thoughts and prayers are with you and your family and your community. That's a very challenging and tough thing to have to go through, especially for our First Nation communities who are so tight knit and close to one another. Over to you, Honourable Marc Miller, to address those comments.
Yeah, Chief Harris, again, I just want to echo the comments. My deepest condolences on the loss of your mother. I've had a number of friends who've lost their parents in similar conditions, and it's certainly not the way you want to honor someone's death, particularly when you have funerals that everyone has to be distant. These are times where people get emotional and they want to be close. So it's very sad, and it feels very inhuman in a way. So in a sense that I can't. I'm not you, obviously, and I can't understand the depth of your loss, but I do understand the devastating effect that this can have. And I would on your specific point, there are 62 organizations. They aren't all friendship centers that have been funded. I've asked my officials to provide that list. I believe it's actually public online on the ISK website, but I'll have Griffin or Catherine pass that along. And if there are, again, we still have money, and if there are resources that you feel should be directed in a particular way, we can encourage you to reach out to us and have that organization submit and ask. We've tried to make it as stress-free as possible and as seamless as possible. Understanding that we are a federal government. We make everyone's life stressful sometimes, but it is important to note that we've tried to make it as stress-free as possible in terms of the funding application. I saw some of the comments on the infrastructure ask. It is, and people have advocated very, very hard for closing that infrastructure gap, and it was noted in the speech from the throne. I did simply want to say that this is, having funds for infrastructure builds that are dealing with this crisis are something that are very, very much top of mind. I just wanted to highlight that is also a longer term issue that we have to engage in together, in addition to filling some of the shovel-ready projects that exist, working on a long-term plan to curb and to close that infrastructure gap.
Thank you so much. We are at the end of our time. We are scheduled to wrap up here at 3:30, and we've gone a few minutes over. I want to thank the Honourable Marc Miller, Minister of Indigenous Services Canada, for taking the time to meet with us today and to answer your questions. Thank you to all of our panelists from the First Nations Leadership Council, the First Nations Health Authority, for joining us today. and all the chiefs out there that are watching, all the leadership that are watching. I raise my hands to you and all the good work that you have been doing to address the pandemic and the safety of all your community members. That's all we have today. And stay healthy and safe out there, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.